Hello, everyone. Thank you for your attendance of the second session of Masterclass on neuromarketing science and how to guide to complex area of neuroscience. And today with us is my colleague Steven Nart. He will talk about applying neurotechniques in brand measurement. And my great pleasure is having him here, for at least two reasons. One is because he's very experienced in applying neuromeasures in brand measurement, and he likes to call him as a specialist for applying, not for science. At previous session, we had Manuel who was talking about the science behind practice. Today we have Steven because he's more experienced with how it works in everyday research practice. And the second reason is because Steven is very experienced with our famous Sensidium framework. Sensidium is about brand and human needs, and that's why he's trying to connect brand measurement and the new techniques based in neuroscience with Sensidium framework. So I suppose that is also interesting for you who are familiar with our Sensidium framework to hear Steven because of that. So enjoy Steven's speech. Steven, floor is yours. And
well, thank you very much. All right. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. I'm also super excited to talk about, indeed, and I always stress it, the application of neurotechniques in an area that I care about a lot as the global solutions lead for everything that's related to brand strategy, research, and activation. And the reason why is it the true specialist. I hope you had the opportunity to listen to him, but that's Manuel. He's the neuro specialist. My passion is brands, but because of everything that we've learned about how people make brand choices, it's because of that we realize that we really need some of these neural techniques in order to really get to the proper understanding of brands that is required in order to make the right decisions, in order to ultimately grow our clients' brands. And so that's why today I also, in a way, want to take you through that process. I want to talk a little bit about our latest, freshest understanding from behavioral science, how people make choices. Then you will understand the reason why time really matters. And then I want to share two applications. And in both cases, it's quite an accessible neuro tool where we use response time measurement. Because it's so accessible, we started to integrate it quite a few years ago, and in the meantime, we're using it all the time. Where some of the other neuro techniques, even though they're super cool, sometimes logistically it can be a little bit tougher to integrate them. You may need a lab environment and so on. And the tools that we have here can be integrated pretty much on any single study. So let me start with explaining a little bit why does time matter. And in order to understand that in the context of brands, I want to start with explaining a little bit what today, how we understand how people make decisions. And so the way to think about it is that whenever we make a choice, whenever we just grab a brand or think for years about buying a next car, uh, in both those scenarios, um, it's always a mix of what we call more deliberate and more automatic processing, more mindful, more mindless. Um, and it's a mix, it's a continuum. So there's many different processes that are always ongoing at the same time. For many of you, this will sound familiar to how you've heard explanations about system 1 and system 2. System 1 fast, system 2 slow. And of course, the concepts are connected. But there is a very important difference. System 1 and system 2, at least in the way that it has been explained, comes across as very binary. And that's not, it's either or. So either it's fast or it's slow. And in reality, most choices sort of switch from one side to the other. So, you know, if let's think about two choices that we make, Greek yogurt and your next car. So one is very low involvement for most people, I would expect, and the other one is high involvement, big ticket. So typically you would say, okay, when you buy a car, it's system 2. When you buy a yogurt, it's system 1. Well, the reality is more nuanced than that. Even when you buy a jar of yogurt, there is still, and even though you do it on autopilot, you always buy the same one, there is still an executive control, which is almost like a switch inside your brain, if you like, that monitors if your mindless, your automatic choice, if it actually makes sense. So imagine you always go to the same supermarket, you always buy the same thing, but all of a sudden they've doubled the price. Your executive control will pick up on that. So, and that means that there is actually very mindful processing, even for what is always very mindless. Same with buying a car. You would think, okay, you're gonna spend a few 10,000 euro on your next car. You're gonna think through, but think about it. When you are in that process, you are not making an evaluation of all the possible brands and models that are out there. Intuitively, you narrow it down to whatever, maybe 3. Like if you like German luxury cars, then it's BMW, Audi, or Mercedes, and that's it. And you're not even looking outside of that. So the both are always at play, but definitely in many cases people implicitly in a split second make a decision, and that's something that we definitely have to remember. A second thing that we have to be very conscious of is what influences then this going back and forth, this continuing from mindful to mindless. There we see internal influences and whatever goes on inside our head, like the goals and motivation that we have, our memory, the mood of the moment. If it's a sunny day today, I might be in a very good mood versus if I was in a fight this morning, you know, so this can have an influence. And then there are many external influences like the physical context, the social cultural context, and also what you do as a brand. What you do as a brand is also an external influence on the choices that people make, where you can influence whether people are more mindful or more mindless. And we like to talk about the brand instruments. So you can either give a brand experience, you can work on perception, like imagery association, or on identity, what many of us call brand assets. So looking like you, the red in Coca-Cola, the shape of the bottle, and so on. And through your identity, through your perception, through your experience, to a certain extent, you can influence this. For instance, you can facilitate automatic processing by making sure that people intuitively recognize your brand. You can facilitate automatic processing by making sure that people have, without thinking about it, associate your brand with whatever. If you're the Corona beer, it's a summer beer. People have that association. They don't need to think about what is an appropriate beer for the summer. They know it's a Corona beer. And so the two examples that I gave are what you see in the middle of the screen, two examples of reinforcing, facilitating automated decision making, which is hugely important whenever you're trying to maintain or even grow your brand. There are other strategies where you're actually like disrupt, where you're actively trying to stop automatic processing. You're trying to shock people. There was quite a famous campaign from Burger King where they showed like a rotten, moldy burger, which is repulsive, but it grabbed attention, and then they could come with a message that the reason why it looks moldy and rotten is because they use fresh ingredients, where McDonald's apparently doesn't. And then in other cases, you also justification. But let's not zoom in too much about that. But certainly, when we talk about facilitating automated decision making, it has to be intuitive. Now, this is where and reinforce it. Let me not dwell too much on that, but reinforce in general is something which is important for all brands. The example that you see here, Tony's Chocolonis. I don't know if it's available on the market. In Serbia, if not, try to find it, because it's really good chocolate. But they actually it's a purpose-born brand. They want to rid the world of slavery. Apparently, still a lot of slavery in producing cacao, and they want to do something about that. And that is a message which, if you come across it, disrupts. At least I wasn't aware, or was never thinking about slavery and chocolate. I never made that connection. So it's a brand that is born through disruption, but they still need to reinforce. They still have their brand assets. They still have their their packaging, the font, the color combinations, the taste combinations, even, that all intuitively evoke the brand. So reinforce is always important. So we've given the example of when you need to reinforce on perception and when you need to reinforce on identity. And those are the two applications that I want to talk about today. We want to zoom in on brand assets. We'll do that first. And then we'll zoom in on brand territory, and I'll try to spend a little bit less time on that, as I'm sure you'll get the idea after we talk about the brand assets. Now, little step back. Because we want to talk about the applications, I also have to explain in what way I have to explain a little bit what the application is. So first, I will explain what are brand assets and why they are important, and then I'll explain our approach, where the neuro approach, the MCRT, the multi-choice reaction time, is a key element in getting to our different metrics. So, but first, start with a quick definition. A distinctive asset is basically consistent sensory and semantic cues that signal the brand name to consumers in a unique and intuitive way. So it's any kind of brand cue that evokes the brand in a completely unique way, or in an as unique as possible way. So we had Coke. Let's think about another example, like Kinder. Kinder chocolate. They have the color orange. They have like the little kits they put on the pack, the very specific logo with the K in a different color, the milk being poured. All of these, when you see them in isolation, they make you think of Kinder, the brand. So that is what a brand asset is, and it can be sort of those more typical cues that you put on a packaging, but it can also be like a brand ambassador, like Roger Federer or Thierry Henry for Gillette. It can be a unique scent. If you board a Singapore Airlines flight, you have like the unique Singapore Airlines scent. It can be a song, like from McDonald's, for instance. There's a Justin Timberlake tune. I'm loving it. I'm not going to sing it because whenever I try, people always say that I do a really bad impression of Justin Timberlake. So I'm not going to do that, and so on and so on. So anything that connects with any of the 5 senses and that evokes the brand. Why is it so important? 2 reasons. One, to get attention in a very easy way. People don't look for your advertising. They bump into it. So you cannot make it too difficult in a very intuitive way. They have to be able to identify the right a brand. And on top of that, it also enables you like a little bit of creativity. So Kit Kat, for instance, just the shape of the product, you can start to play with it a little bit. You don't even have to mention the brand. Same for McDonald's. But there is an additional element. So it's about attention salience, evoking, grabbing attention. But it's also about becoming part of what we call the brand mental network. And the brand mental network is basically all the associations that people have with your brand. And of course, it is important what those associations are. It's better if people associate your brand with something that matters to them. That drives their choice. But in general, it's actually good to have associations as long as they're not negative. Why? Because in general, it makes people think more of the brand, and therefore, in the moment of truth, again, it's more likely that your brand will come to mind first, which is hugely important. And so the example you see here is for an insurance company where they featured Harvey Keitel, which, for those of you who know their movie history a little bit, if I'm not mistaken, is Mr. Pink in Reservoir Dogs. It could be a different color, but he's like a bit of a bad guy. The fixer takes care of things, and even though in this case there's no link with what Direct Line as a brand really wants to stand for, it helps to make to keep the brand top of mind, let's say. So how do we look at brand assets? For us, there's 2 like broad elements that are important. One, you need branding power. The basic definition, you need to bring the brand to mind in an intuitive and unique way. The second one is something where we strongly believe in, where some competitors don't pay attention to this, is that you want to make sure that your assets also, at least some of them, connect with what you as a brand want to be famous for. So think of George Clooney, often used by Nespresso. When you think George Clooney, you think Nespresso. But when you think George Clooney, you also think about the sophistication that Nespresso wants to be famous for. So George Clooney evokes what the brand wants to be famous for. And that is what we mean with brand affinity. If Nespresso would have worked with whatever, you may disagree, but like Kim Kardashian, Wayne Rooney, like less sophisticated people, then it just wouldn't have worked that well. So what we do is indeed apply a neuro tool in this context, and we work with this MCRT, multi-choice reaction time. Now, why is it such a beautiful tool? One element which is very important is that it includes a competitive environment, and we've seen from working with let's say single choice reaction time that when you don't have that competitive context, you create, after a while, you create a bias which is kind of unavoidable. But when you have multiple brands, then people have to choose between brands, and therefore it's more sensitive, let's say. We used to the old response time tools. The response time was born in sort of an academia context quite some time ago. But the old tools were all like single brand, which means that it could take forever to get to an attribute list, and we just don't have that much time with respondents anymore. Lastly, it's very intuitive, so you don't need to explain it too much to respondents. They get the hang of it very soon. This is what it looks like, at least in when we are talking about the brand assets application of MCRT. So basically, we have very neutral brands across the top, across the bottom. In the middle, we have the asset that we want to test, like the old Uncle Ben's, when in those markets at least where it's still used, for instance. And then we just ask people to tell us which brand they associate it with. It all looks very, very simple. In reality, there is a lot of calculations, calibrations, warming up, etc., which is happening under the bonnet. So it's really a carefully tuned product, if you like. And just to give you a couple of examples, an attention check, we need to make sure that people are paying attention. Very simple, but sometimes respondents are just clicking through a questionnaire, and we have ways to make sure that they're focused. Then text calibration, brand assets are often visuals, but sometimes you have a tagline, and when you have a 3-word tagline versus a 10-word tagline, that makes a difference because you have to read it. So we do a calibration for that. Some people read faster than others. We have the position calibration, as you can see in this layout. So every time you move to the next asset, you click on this arrow, but that means that you're closer to, in this case, Risogallo, and you're furthest away from Bio and Lustukru. So we calibrate also for that, which again is individual for every respondent. The time it takes to get to each of the 6 positions is different. And then also multi-choice calibration. So when we go on to like when we click 3 brands, so we associate 3 brands, then we can measure the time for all of them. I just want to stress it again. I know I've mentioned it before. Why is it so important to test brand assets implicitly? It's true, there are competitors out there that just work with spontaneous association. So you just say color red, and then you ask which brands come to mind, which soft drink brands, whatever. If you think about the example I always give, if you think about this example, the color red soft drink, if you think about it long enough, Coke will come to mind. Coke, the brand. Now, but it's not powerful unless it comes to mind really, really fast, because when they are your consumer is watching TV, is maybe having a conversation in the meantime, multi-screening, whatever, they are not actively paying attention to what brand the commercial is for. So it has to come intuitive. Same when you go shopping, you're loading whatever, like 80 different products into your trolley. You don't have time to look for everything. If it's not intuitively clear, people will just grab something else. So it has to be in that split second where people decide what they put in their trolley. The brand has to come to mind, and that's why it's hugely important to test it in an implicit way. These are some numbers. I'm not going to dwell too much on them, but it shows a little bit. Let's focus on the one on the right. It shows the variance, let's say, between explicit responses and quick responses. And there's a slight positive correlation between when you have a high explicit score, it's also more likely that more people will have a quick association. But it's actually pretty limited. You see quite a big scatter. And what that says is that we are, by introducing the time element, we are definitely measuring something different. So it's proof that it adds value. Let's illustrate with a little bit of a case study. This is for Colgate-Palmolive brand, a study done in Mexico for a deodorant brand. It's called Lady Speed Stick. And in Mexico, they've been using the character that you see here in front of you. She's fictitious, but they call her Barbara Blade. And Barbara Blade is a little bit like a female version of Indiana Jones, Lara Croft, that kind of sort of adventurer. Now, initially, they dressed her, they positioned her as a very indeed adventurous person, traveling around the globe, dealing with lots of very tough issues. But they from a positioning point of view, they felt that the character was too far removed from the more everyday consumer, Mexican women, that they were targeting. So they came up with alternative versions of Barbara Blade that you can see, for instance, here in left towards the left, second from the bottom. And what they wanted to do next to testing other potential assets, they wanted to know if those softer executions, if you like, of Barbara Blade would also work. Of course, like always, we like to test our brand assets in a competitive context, because otherwise we create positive bias for the client brand. That wouldn't work. So the way that we initially analyze the results is based is using a classification matrix where we look at branding power, brand uniqueness, and brand linkage, and then brand affinity as well. So on, let's say, the x-axis, it combines both elements of brand linkage and brand uniqueness. What we basically say that if your brand, sorry, if the asset does not succeed in bringing the brand to mind in a unique way, then you should not use it in isolation. Today, it is not a brand asset. We can have a discussion whether it can be tomorrow, but today, don't use it as an alternative for showing the brand name. Now, when uniqueness is decent enough, we also look at brand alignment. We mostly want to avoid like negative associations. So we might put some caution and diagnose, but then we look at the brand linkage. We look at the implicit score. If that one is already above 50, then you end up in the distinctive icon box. If not, then you have the potential, but you're not there yet. So the client needs to continue to invest. And then ultimately, what we do is sort of make a recommendation, not on the individual brand assets, because often we test multiple alternatives, but we make a recommendation on let's say the final choice. If they have 3 taglines, we say which one is the best one. If they have a variety of packaging executions, we make a recommendation. In this case, I remember the Indiana Jones version and the softer version of Barbara Blade. There we noticed that the Indiana Jones expressions, which have been in the market for longer, were more successful. But because we're also taking into account brand strategy, we did say, okay, it's not as good, but in time, it's good enough. And in time, it will definitely become a strong brand asset if you keep using it consistently. But you have to make a choice. Because even when you talk about brand ambassadors, it's just like a little side track. If you look at how brand ambassadors are used, they're typically shown in the same way. So it's not just the face, but it's also the attire, the costume. So Tiger Woods is almost always shown with a black cap, often with a red shirt, and when the shirt's not red, they just find another way to introduce a red element. Same with George Clooney, Charlize Theron, Keira Knightley. There is a lot of consistency there. So that's how we use it in brand asset. Let me now take some time to talk through a tool which we call brand positioning, which helps you to think about a brand positioner, which helps you to think about your brand positioning. The tool itself, I'll explain in a little bit more detail, is mostly used when you want to reposition like update, refresh, one brand. And we talk here when it's more of an evolution than a revolution, because if it's a revolution, you need to take a bigger step back and really look at you know our sort of motivations, the needs in the category changing, our category boundaries blurring. You take a more distant view. So here it's a bit more focused, and there are some other usage applications like when you have a small portfolio or when you want to stretch. How do we approach this? Well, we have a quite agile approach where we work together with you, with our clients, in order to craft the right brand positioning. So we have three phases: define, measure, and activate. In the define phase, we do an exploration, typically in a working session, of the potential roles the brand can play. So there we make like a long list of potential attributes around which you can build a positioning. This is done in a working session, but typically we infuse in the beginning of the session. We inspire with the curation that we have done, sort of learning from existing data resources inside the client organization, but also from Ipsos. Like we can bring in trends, for instance. How people are responding to the pandemic. Those are things where we have a lot of data on. And if needed, we can do some deep dives. One tool, which is we're not going to go into today, unfortunately, but it's Sensidia Metaphors, which is a very flexible tool in order to understand what people expect from a certain category. And because sometimes trying to put everything into attributes is very killing almost for a respondent. Like when you want this broader exploration, we ask people to tell us their ideal beer, their ideal coffee, their ideal car, in their own words. But because we want to do that in a we want them to dig a little bit deeper, scratch beyond the surface. We want to avoid being too superficial. We let them use visual metaphors that represent like a wide variety of deeper meanings. So it's a really cool tool, and if you ever want to know more, do reach out to us. Then, based on we have our curation, we have some new pieces of information, we have a working session where we approach the topic from a variety of angles, and then end it with a long list of 50 potential brand roles, which we then put in the measure phase, which is in essence sort of an equity and driver study. But the way that we measure the brand profiling is again through MCRT. Why? Because what we ultimately want is for people to intuitively have associations with our brand. Only explicitly, only in a way that people would get to it after deliberation is typically not good enough. You have to aim a little bit higher. And then in the end, we end with a workshop. So what does, let's zoom in on the measure phase, the middle phase. It's a relatively short questionnaire. It can be 10 to 15 minutes, depending on whether or not we include some of the optional modules. But at this stage, the research becomes relatively simple. Typically, we prefer to work with 500 respondents, but that's actually driven by the brand mental network that you also saw in the beginning, rather than by the MCRT. That one we can even start doing with a small sample of 220. Then we always believe in kind of complementing data. Is with triangulation. We have all our learnings from the define phase. In the measure phase, we measure the attributes, but we also look, for instance, at BMN, because it can give us like a very good idea of sort of the other associations that people have, positive, but actually also negative. It's something that we don't tend to focus on too much. And then we measure our attributes. Now, when we measure attributes, when we measure imagery associations, then we do use logos. Logos in general give the respondent like a better user experience, has a nicer look and feel. And in this case, unlike with brand assets, you're not biasing the respondent. This is just an easy way for them to recognize the brand. Yeah, a module which we sometimes also include, and it's a little bit like Sensidia metaphors, but then focusing on the negative, is called hurdle. So hurdle helps us to understand, for instance, barriers that people have to engage with a certain brand. I just wanted to show it because it's also a cool tool. It's not a neuro tool, but still a tool that also helps us to connect better with sort of a deeper layer of understanding, if you like, to scratch beyond the obvious, if you like. So there we go. We bring all of that, all of those different pieces of input together, and then ultimately end up with a recommendation of a specific platform around which we can build like a full brand value proposition, where in the workshop we will also think about how to activate and so on and so on. Let me show like very quickly what a real life study looks like, but I want to make sure we don't use up too much of your time. When in this, it's a little case study for McVitie's. They wanted to know what is important in the category, what is relevant, what is driving choice. Then they also wanted to know what am I currently what am I currently owning? Where do I have more of a right to play than competition, and what are the strengths of competition? And then based on that, ultimately what they wanted out of this study is to be able to define their key point of difference. What some of our clients call it like a brand edge. What is sort of the one thing that you have and nobody else has? So we worked with that long list. These are the top 30 items in this category. So it's a kind of breakfast biscuits. So you have well, good value for money. Tastes great, improves my mood. Tastes like the flavor it promises. Helps re-energize. So there's a lot of variety. In this case, we didn't explicitly use Sensidium, but when we are trying to think about the different potential attributes, it's always in our head. It's an IP that we always use. So this then tells us, okay, what are things that are important. Then we can have that. We have that. Let's say the BMN, which also gives us a bit of a broader understanding. We know, for instance, that McVitie's a negative. It's seen as very boring and plain, but there are some unique elements here as well. Eat with tea, it's a study done in the UK. Very traditional. It's digestive. There's an association with cheese and so on and so on. So this tells us something extra about the brand. Then when we look at the output of the MCRT exercise, we show it in a matrix, brand fit to relevance, which I'm very conscious of, looks very similar to what this matrix would look like without using the implicit tool. But it's the quality of the data, the fact that when we say can be done is owned by McVitie's, that it is because that is the fast association. Because like an item like can be done, any biscuit can be done. But when people have a fast association there, then it's something that you own. So that's where the value, and it's a little bit nuanced, but that's where the value of the tool comes in. So that then helps us to understand what are potential brand roles. In case of McVitie's, good value for money, suitable with a hot drink, not too chewy, and something that the whole family can enjoy. So why do we call these potential brand roles? Because all of these are driving choice McVitie's has a bigger right to play than competition. There are other things that make McVitie's unique, yeah, like the shape, the fact that it's plain and simple, that it can be done. But these are things that do not drive choice. So there's no point in developing a proposition around those ideas. And then there are some alternative brand roles, things where today McVitie's is not playing, but potentially, certainly if you're able to connect it to some of the potential brand roles where McVitie's does have a right to play, then maybe that's something that they could own in the future. So that's basically how we play with it a little bit, and then again, ultimately, it helps us to construct a brand positioning around this, which we typically capture in a brand proposition, a brand key, a brand essence, whatever you want to call it, and which we then also activate. We think about so what is the impact on communication, on the point of sales, on potentially innovating some of the products as well. So it gives broad input on strategy, but then also broad input on activation. Let's say. So this is what I wanted to share today. So again, there was a very clear focus on showing how response time is being used in the day-to-day practice, let's say, of brand measurement. So I think if I believe there were some frequently asked questions that we were going to address.
Yeah, I suppose that you can hear me. Thank you,
I can.
Steven.
Yeah.
It was very interesting and I suppose very useful because it's a real application of neurometrics in brand exploration. And since we had some experience with those tools, and also we collected some questions coming from our clients to ask you. So if you allow me, I will ask you some questions. The first one is about the first part of the presentation. So if you want, you can go to that slide. It's about brand assets, and it's a very interesting story about the reaction time combination of reaction time and explicit measures, as we call them. So, and it's pretty much clear. But about recommendations, our clients frequently ask us about the optimal number of assets that needs to be activated for some optimal performance in building brand network assets. So if you can tell us something about that, do we have some R&D studies or wherever, maybe based on your experience, what's the optimal number? Is there any magical number in brand assets?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think typically I would say 5 to 6. That's a number that we always have in mind. But I think there's a few elements that are really important there. One is that in general, it is important to have a variety of brand assets. Why? Because they all kind of contribute in a different way. Like for instance,
Steven, can you hear us? We lost you in a second. So if you can,
sorry.
If you can repeat what you said in last few seconds.
Okay. So the thing is that it's good to have a different types of assets. So not all your assets, for instance, should be visual. You should have a mix of visual and verbal. Why? Because visual assets make it easier for people to remember the brand that a commercial was about. This is a specific application, but verbal assets like a tagline make it easier to remember the advertising. in the first place. So they play a different role. Another one another mix or another balance that I think is important is that you have a mix of more neutral assets and then assets that evoke more of what you want to be famous for. Why? Because a brand positioning is not set in stone. It evolves, and sometimes you have assets that like there's an example for a beer brand that used like a girl in a bikini as an asset, and it worked really well for many years, but people started to look differently a little bit after Me Too movement, etc. For a lot of people, it's offensive. In that specific country, we've seen beer as a category grow amongst women who feel offended by your key icon. So then you want to make sure that you have some other assets, because you just at that stage you just have to retire that asset. You can't use it anymore. It's offensive. Uncle Ben's is another one, by the way, in some countries. So you have that's another reason why you need a little bit of a mix. Then again, every asset requires investment to build it, and then investment to you have to keep using it, because it's all about consistency. So if you have like 20 assets, it's not sustainable. It's impossible to have strong associations with that many different assets. So that's why you sort of end up with 5 to 6. A nice balance of visual, verbal, sound is actually becoming more important as well. Yeah, I hope that gives enough of an answer.
Yeah, for me, it really helps. I suppose that the same goes to our clients. So my next and maybe the last question is about response time. So I have to be honest, sometimes response time looks pretty much basic. Where's neuro there? We actually used to have, neuro measures are basic, are frequently very complex, and you need, helmet, or I don't know, galvanic reaction and so on. So what's the point here? How is that reaction time is a measure of neuroactivities and indicator of such a complex complex measures behind?
Yeah, no, and you're right. It is simple, but that's the beauty of it, and it's less simple than it looks at first, because under the bonnet and behind the scenes, there's a lot of complex calculations. There is a lot of science involved, but obviously logistically, the way that we set it up, the only thing you need is an internet connection. That is important, but finding a place on the planet where you don't have an internet connection, it's becoming more rare, right? So that means that it's very, very scalable. And of course, I'm super interested in all these other things, like galvanic skin response and so on. But the clients that we work for, they expect us to be able to deliver globally. So when I can only do a research in Paris, New York, and Mexico City, then it's interesting. It's nice to have, but it's not something that we can roll out across, for instance, a full brand equity program or something. And that's why the simplicity is actually one of the key benefits. It also means that it's not much more expensive, right? So we've pre-programmed this module. There's a lot of automation also in the calculation of the scores. It's a little bit of extra time in the questionnaire for the calibration, but that's it. So it brings it, it's a way to democratize neuro. That's how I think about it.
Thank you. That's a really nice statement about neuro. So it's about actually a large application of the measure, and also how is it precise? How much it's precise? Because considering that you have only online network for measuring, but I'm not sure about the precision measuring that time. So do we have answer to that?
It's to the millisecond. So the way that we measure it, it's really to the millisecond. So and we know actually because like yeah, it's some we recently developed like the possibility to test sound and video assets, which brings some extra complexity. Let's not go into that, but it's again not as easy as it sounds. And one thing that I remember is that when people hear a famous song, and this is research actually done with one of those helmets on your head, it takes on average 300 milliseconds to recognize that song. So your person songs that you really like, as soon as it begins playing, 300 milliseconds. Now, 300 milliseconds sounds like, yeah, all right. So when people know something, they instantly recognize it. But it's still too much. It's still something that we have to take into account. So when we did the extra calibration needed to test sound assets, we were really talking about differences of milliseconds sometimes, because that can make the difference between an implicit association and an explicit one. So yeah, but luckily enough, and that's also why we use online. Luckily enough, it's very easy to measure. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. It was very useful. And I hope that we make closer to our clients our reaction time measures, because the previous session, I told that I personally like very much reaction time. So today I just wanted to show how it's very practical measure for everyday business around the globe, and that's one of the first reasons why we use it. And also the simplicity of the measure, which is giving us lots of information. I mean, that's the best, I would say, but correct me if I'm wrong. I would say that is the best way how to explore brand today. I mean, all other available metrics are more complex and really not easy to apply everywhere, not respondent friendly, and I don't know. We had efforts with, for example, Sensidium, when it was too complex to be questioned in normal surveys today, which are mainly on mobile, to take a lot much shorter and so on. So is it one of the best solutions for brand exploration today? Or I over exaggerated?
Well, it's often you don't even have to choose. Like you can still integrate Sensidium, for instance, into this as well. It's true that the pressure to make questionnaire time shorter and more well, gamification is exaggerated, but a little bit more engaging at least is something that's hugely important. But it's yeah is it the best way? I think it definitely gives you a unique contribution that you do not get from traditional brand research. And because what we just said, the efficiency, it also means that it's scalable, and that you don't need to invest lots and lots of money to fly over devices. You know that you can very easily get to a broad representative sample. There's just not a lot of logistical limitations that also have an impact on the validity of the research. So yeah, maybe it is the best. Let's be bold. Yes.
Thank you, Stephen. It's really hopeful to see to hear that. So, my dear clients, you heard Stephen. Reaction time is it helps in brand exploration, and try it. It's very simple, and we can do it pretty much fast with very high expertise in this domain. So I suppose that we will today we were interesting, and kept your attention. And also, I'm inviting you for the next session. Next session will be also about application of neuromeasures, maybe even more practical in terms, because as you remember, I announced last time that we had a survey about the packaging design of the brand that we invented for this purpose, and you will see the results of the study. Study is finished yesterday, so we are ready to present it on the next session. Next session is on June 17, and we are expecting you. Hope that you have your best bet. So until then, stay tuned. Read us. Write text to us wherever you want. We are available for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.